It's really easy to steal away to the mountains to find peace. It's much harder to find it from where you are. And so the feeling when he said it was a challenge. If you run away or you go somewhere, you bring all your stuff with you, like your emotional stuff that comes with it. You don't leave it. So whatever you're working through, whatever you're struggling with, you don't necessarily leave it when you change places.
Welcome back to Religion to Reality, the podcast about living an integrated life. I'm your host, Dave Plisky, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Father John Gribowich. This season is all about listening, and so we are listening to people from across the faith spectrum of the world. We just finished with 5 episodes on Buddhism, and today is kind of a segue episode between Buddhism and Taoism. But before we get into Taoism, we're going to hear from 2 voices today. Bryan Lorentz is going to talk about kind of the spirituality that's been written on his heart from when he was a kid and the dynamics of what it's like to be in that family situation and working through that, as well as, what it's like traveling to other places to get to know new spiritualities firsthand. Clay Dockery, on the other hand, is going to talk to us about what it was like working in interfaith ministry directly, where he worked with Catholics and Jews who were married to one another and eventually maybe needed to work through some spiritual differences that they found themselves in. The thing that ties these together is that experience of a very real dynamic that can happen in a family when the traditions are not the same, or when someone feels a calling by the divine to move deeper into a tradition or to explore another one, and what happens when that tension sort of plays out. Today, we are joined by Bryan Lorentz, who teaches world religions at Sacred Heart Prep in Atherton, California, and has spent nearly 2 decades teaching high school students and leading retreats and immersion experiences across the Bay Area. He holds a master's degree in human development and psychology from Harvard, where he studied neuroscience and decision-making. His intellectual and spiritual formation has unfolded over many years, deepening through extended periods of study in monasteries, temples, and universities throughout Nepal, Tibet, India, Sri Lanka, and China. Bryan comes from a long line of teachers and musicians, with both of his parents devoting more than 40 years to education, retreat work, and parish ministry. Outside the classroom, he sings and plays guitar professionally and serves as music director at St. Denis Church in Menlo Park. He spends much of his time running and meditating in the redwood forests of the Santa Cruz Mountains, drawn by a love of the natural world and a commitment to contemplative living. As a devoted father, he works alongside his 14-year-old son, Zavi, in their family beekeeping venture, Babies, making Bay Area wildflower honey. Bryan, it's a pleasure. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dave. And what's up, John?
It's so great to be with you.
I'd love to hear more about your background, Bryan. Just what it was like for you growing up. Clearly you seem to be drawing from a number of traditions in your kind of approach to meditation and contemplation. So I'd just love to kind of hear your story a bit.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I grew up in San Francisco. Both my parents are high school teachers. And so that was always part of just the culture of our family is education. And we all had the same breaks, summers and Christmas breaks, Easter, all that. And the other part of my family, we just, the other side of it, we're all musicians. So that was, again, part of growing up. Music was big, and we spent a lot of time together, road trips and car trips and all that. But I probably was mom and dad leading us in the occasional philosophical conversation. They working with high school students, they were ready for when, their 5 boys, because I have 4 brothers, had any questions that dealt with, theology or spirituality. They were ready for it. And in a way that was always inviting. I never felt shut down in when we had doubts or questions it was just always conversational and open. So I felt very safe and comfortable talking to my parents about these topics. And they had it down to an art and a science, in dialogue with young people about making meaning and trying to understand their lives, wherever they are and however they're feeling. So in the midst of all that, I'm in fifth grade, if we're telling a story, and I don't know where this came from, but John and I have shared some of these stories together. Um, but for some of us, it feels like you get called early to something, and where it comes from, or what movie or book or conversation we had that led us to this is not always clear. But I had this really strong impression that prayer works. And I could tell you stories about that, but I remember my mom teaching us how to pray when we were really little, and I had this feeling that it could save my life. And at different points in my life, it felt like it did. So prayer was again part of my family's culture. It was common. It was something we did at New Year's and at meals and at church. It was sort of just part of who we were. And yeah, I was probably fifth grade when I was like, I love prayer, and it just feels like something I need to do more of in my life. It must have been something like during Lent. One year, I was like, "Yo, I'm gonna pray more. I'm gonna pray more." And to get more specific, I was like, "Well, I love helping people. I love praying. What kind of life would that be?" And to me, it sounded like a monk. And I was like, "Oh, I think when I grow up, I want to be a monk. But you know what? I don't want to wait. And I'm kind of impatient. Like, I don't want to wait to be a monk. Like, I think I could do that now." And I was like adamant about it. And one Halloween, my family is like, "What are we gonna do? What are you guys gonna dress up for?" And my brothers are, Ninja Turtles and whatever it was. I'm gonna be I'm gonna wear a scary mask and have a fog machine. It's like, "Oh, that's cool." "Bryan, what are you gonna do?" And I was like, uh, "I'm gonna be a monk." And it's like, "Really?" It's like, "Yeah, yeah." "No, what if you just did a Star Wars thing? You wore the robe." I was like, "No, the robe is good."
Don't need the lightsaber.
Yeah, yeah, no. And so I was like, "No, we have photos of this." And I was like, "No," but I remember a series of conversations with my parents, always supportive with whatever crazy ideas we had, and in safe, good ways. And it's like, "Oh, I want to be a rollerblader. I want to do this." It's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Uh, I want to learn how to snowboard." "Yeah, yeah. Okay. I want to be a monk." "Yeah." But no, like, I want to travel to the East. And I had this really romanticized vision in my head of what it meant to be a monk.
So
Go to
were you
the
not
East.
thinking of because you said your church? Were you raised Catholic?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, but you
Yeah.
weren't thinking about a monk in like a Catholic monastery. You're thinking about a Buddhist monk or something.
You
Like
know,
when you say the East, that's what I'm guessing. You didn't mean the East Coast.
it wasn't so in a fifth grader's mind, right? So what? I'm 12 years old,
Yeah,
11,
yeah.
and I'm thinking like it's just no, it's out there. It's in the far East. And
Okay.
to me, like I would, pray Hail Marys, Our Fathers, go to church. All that was like deeply ingrained in who I was. The monk that I dressed up as was I used to listen to Gregorian chant CDs.
Mhm.
Right? Oh my God, what's that?
Absolutely.
Oh my God. And I love praying. I love meditating. I was like, well, who prays and meditates all day for the world? It's like monks. I was like, oh, this makes sense to me. And I had reasoned that, hey, I'm so worried all the time about people liking me, but it feels better when I'm worried about taking care of them and praying for them. That's probably a better use of my mind than worrying about me. And I thought, well, why don't I just spend more time praying for people than worrying about what they're thinking about me? Which, as a fifth grader, it's like I had this whole social side of my persona wake up and get worried. Anxiety comes in. It's like, oh my God, like I started combing my hair every day. And it's like, there was a change for me between fourth and fifth grade of like, all of a sudden I had a social sense of like, oh my God, like, do people actually like who I am? Like all the worries came in. And this is adolescence, right? This is classic development stuff. But for me, it's like I that's not a game I'll ever win. And I don't know if I even want to play it. And so I was like, oh, I'll be a monk. This is going to be good. Like this is a way forward and maybe a way out of dealing with the drama that fifth and sixth grade would bring. And so I had this really big conversation with my dad after a soccer practice. It was raining. We got really muddy, and my dad picked me up in the minivan. And I had been talking to him and my mom for a couple months about letting me go. Really non-specific. You need to let me go to the monastery. I want to be a monk. And I didn't really have a clear plan or anyone to talk to about this. So it wasn't like clear in my head how any of this would work. But so I needed help, and I didn't know where to go with all these feelings of like, I love prayer, I love meditation, I love this life. Like, how do I make this who I am? And so I'm arguing with my dad, and maybe this is a genetic thing, but my dad had left home at 13 to study in the seminary with the Salesians, and he was studying to become a Salesian brother. I don't I don't know if that's like a genetic thing, or it's like, oh, I had this feeling I need to go too, and or what it was, or maybe it was completely separate. I don't know. But I'm sitting in a minivan with my dad, and we start talking about this question. And I'll never forget what he said to me. I said to him, Dad, you of all people should know why I want to go be a monk. And there's this like dead silence in the car. I got you, Dad.
He didn't
You're
prep for that one.
you're supposed to understand me and know what this is like. I have a higher calling, you know? And my mom and dad had said really wonderful things like, Brian, you're at a good school, you've got community here, all these reasonable things. But in my head, it was like, no, like I can't focus with all of this craziness, right? No one understands like the path I'm on. This is sort of a no one understands me kind of mode, right? We know that. And my dad knew what to say, and was really heartfelt. He said, and verbatim said this, Brian, it's really easy to steal away to the mountains to find peace. It's much harder to find it from where you are. And so the feeling when he said it was a challenge. It was like, if you run away or you go somewhere, you bring all your stuff with you, like your emotional stuff that comes with you don't leave it. So whatever you're working through, whatever you're struggling with, you don't necessarily leave it when you change places. I was like, oh, and I immediately I knew he was right, and I was like, no, but no, this isn't right. This isn't what I wanted, and so I went inside the house, and I'll never forget. I had this habit as a little young person. I would flip through some of my spiritual books that I was reading, Thomas Burton and the little book, Introduction to Buddhism or Taoism, the Tao of Winnie the Pooh, whatever it was, right? These little books I had, and I would flip through some of them to see what it would say, right? This is, do people do this? I don't know. So I had flipped through it, and there was some teacher, monastic, who had said something close to what my dad had said. It was uncanny. And I just felt like, God was saying, not yet, and also wherever you are, right? The classroom, the church, the football field, the soccer field, the gym, the kitchen, when you're in the car with your brothers, all of these places, that is where we struggle and we work and we practice compassion, patience, generosity. I mean, all of these things, qualities that I wanted to cultivate in my mind in the monastery. It'd be easy there. It would be better, right? The mountain is peaceful, right? The monastery is a community of people who support you in your spiritual work. But then I also want to say, looking back, so are our Catholic schools. They're
Mhm.
supposed to be. So are our families. They could be that, right? These spaces where we encourage and support each other in who we are becoming. And so that challenge for me is wanting to leave and wanting to get away from whatever it was. I think has been part of a life lesson for me. Finding the peace and the goodness and the practice from wherever we are, and finding the community outside of the walls of the monastery, even on Zoom here.
Yeah. That's really a beautiful story, Bryan. Thank you so much for sharing because like it shows up, I think, in who you are as a person and maybe specifically as a teacher. And so let's just jump right into how it does show up in the classroom for you. Like you have spent your career in Catholic schools or in Catholic spaces, I think, for right the whole time, I think, for the most part. So you know, we have very prescriptive models of what it means to be Catholic, which then in turn gets translated into like what it means to be spiritual and what it means to be religious and things like that. And so there's just like this almost cookie cutter image of what it means to be a Catholic. And even from your story, and even from just growing up in the family you did, it was not cookie cutter from a lot of ways that people talk about growing up Catholic. And that's amazing. So it was a unique gift. I can almost say the same thing for myself. I had a very unique experience growing up Catholic as well. But how does that then get used and witnessed in the classroom? Like, how do you bring all of your personal desires and experiences into how you help mentor, lead, guide students? What does that look like in a Catholic school?
So imagine having a freshman class in world religions and trying to meditate with them, and the challenge of all the good energy that students have naturally. Like at even at 8:30 in the morning, the students are buzzing with energy. And so the reaction, I think, in teaching something like meditation or wanting students to have this opportunity to grow in a contemplative way and to have a discipline of focus like this, it can be a real struggle to even have students sit still for 1 or 2 minutes. It's amazing, right? And for me, I've had an opportunity to be a coach at different times also, with athletes who are runners, so cross country or track. And the way I work with runners or athletes in general, I often use that lingo, that way that a coach would speak to athletes as I speak to my students. If someone sitting next to you isn't able to sit still, and I would say, for example, if you're on the free throw line, half of my students are athletes. If you're on the free throw line and the whole stadium, the gym is shouting for you to miss it, your job is the same. You've got to come up to the line and take your best shot and not be immediately wrapped up in what someone else is saying or doing right next to you, right? Feel the encouragement from your team. That's all of us. And take the first deep breath and try to settle in and take your shot, which for us is the focus of the meditation, just to breathe. And so when I'm teaching students meditation, it's this wonderful quality. More than half the students want to do it, and the students who are not sure about it just want to feel safe enough to do it, right? And so creating that safe environment in class and building that rapport with students is something I work on. And if students are laughing or they get goofy, I try not to shut them down as much as just, students, if someone next to you can't focus, that's okay. Let them laugh, but don't lose your focus. And that really, for some of them, is like, whoa, I don't want to be the one laughing now. All of a sudden, it's like, whoa, the challenge is out there. And so I spend between 5 to 10 minutes each class in meditation with my students. And so
Nice.
throughout the day, I could be spending 30 or 40 minutes with students in meditation. And that's wonderful for me as a teacher to experience. It's also frustrating and hard. and emotional, and you want students to take it seriously when you're praying. And it's, yeah, I want that for them, and the patience it takes for coaches and teachers, people in education, it's immense. It's immense. And what a vocation, ongoing, you know? So that was a roundabout way of answering your question. Did we even get to an answer? Was
No,
that?
well, I mean, I think if you're cultivating meditative practices in a Catholic space, I think that's something that is essential. And unfortunately, I don't always hear about it happening many times in lots of Catholic classrooms, at least to that extent, and that's not a judgment. It's just that sometimes I feel like in our own tradition, in the Catholic tradition, we're not really given the tools to know how to meditate. So, like, what have you learned from, let's say, maybe explicitly outside the Catholic tradition to help you meditate that makes it a really human experience? It's something that transcends any type of religious tradition.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask about too, because we got to hear like about, as a fifth grader, you basically kind of getting shut down and deciding not to leave school for the monastery while you're, maybe in middle school or something. Uh, but reading your bio, you did in fact go to the East and spend significant time in monasteries and so forth. So I'd love to hear how that ended up happening and what you took from it, like John was saying.
Yeah, there's so much richness in our world in terms of culture and uh, history, languages, people who have made their way in the world in very different ways than we've grown up. And I always learn so much when I travel. I'm very humbled by that experience. Um, we talk about celebrating diversity and the richness of other cultures. Spending time in those communities and really trying to walk with people has been the most inspiring thing in my life. I love it, and it can offer so much perspective. And so for me, I've always been fascinated and in love with, and maybe I over romanticize this, but there's something beautiful about visiting temples that are 1,000 years old, and the very stone on the ground has been warped by people walking barefoot for 1,000 years on it.
Hmm.
like like water softening rock on a waterfall, the footsteps of people in prayer and in prostration, making the rock itself bend, right? Also, it's just, to me, it's a beautiful image for the impact that we have, not just on each other, but on the physical landscape itself, and in conversation with the natural world, the birds and then, I mean, when I walk outside on our campus, we have a farm on campus. There's dozens of species of bird on our campus in Atherton here. It's completely beautiful, and it lends itself to this experience of beauty in the natural world. But when I travel to and have spent time in these monasteries, it's just it's in the air. It's in the air, and yeah, at some point, I have to tell more stories of these visits to monasteries. There's too many to share, but I've been a student of different forms of meditation, and different teachers and different traditions since I was in fifth or sixth grade, and more formally since maybe the early 2000s. Um, the RSCJ, the Sisters of the Sacred Heart, have been similarly inspired. This is a Catholic order of sisters who have this network of schools globally, over 200 schools, and they've made meditation and what they call espacio part of the everyday part of the of school practice and living. So it's like the East-West influence is like, it's so cool to see. It's so cool to see. But it certainly has profoundly impacted my life. Just spending time as a guest in different monasteries is like, it's just so cool. I don't know how to describe it. Seeing people who have dedicated their life to cultivating these qualities: patience, generosity, compassion, um, quieting the mind, I love it.
Do you tend to have the same type of experience at regardless of what the faith tradition is of the monastery that you're visiting? Because you seem to be talking about them collectively, but it seems like you've had individual experiences in, I mean, multiple countries, not just traditions. And just curious how they differ to one another, or if like particular practices brought out particular aspects in of your being, or I'm just curious if there were differences.
Yeah, in 2004, I was waking up at 5 a.m., getting ready for a meditation session with the Burmese monks in a monastery located in Bodh Gaya, India. And sometime after waking up, getting ready for the meditation, you would hear, because it's a really diverse part of India, you would hear the Muslim call to prayer in Arabic, the most beautiful, right? Arabic being sung, right? Calling Muslims to prayer. I couldn't help feeling like, oh my, I'm going to pray right now too. And that devotion, for example, when I walk into a mosque and I feel overwhelmed by the level of devotion, the word Islam, even the name Islam has this connotation of salam, like shalom, peace, right? And surrender is the other connotation. And Islam, just the name of it, right? That captures the essence of that faith is the peace that comes from surrender to God, to Allah. And whenever I hear the Quran sung, I just completely am overwhelmed with beauty and awe, because that tradition of singing the Quran stretches back to the time of Muhammad, right?
Mm.
And so whenever I hear the Muslim call to prayer, though that's not my faith tradition, I'm right there with you. I spent a time in China also studying Taoism and Confucian philosophy in Mandarin at the Beijing Sports University. And when I was there, I had friends who were at the university studying at that university, and they were from places like Djibouti, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and many of them were Muslim. And so they were in the dormitory also. And some of them were such good basketball players. It's the sports university. Even though I wasn't there studying or participating in a sport in that way, I was studying Tai Chi, though. That is a sport at that university, right? But it's one of those spiritual expressions of Taoism that's really fully embodied, right? Tai Chi. And so I'm there, and I have my basketball in hand, and I go. This is a story of just hanging out with some of my Muslim friends in the dorms at the Beijing Sports University in China. Such a cool mix, right? And my friend, his name is Ibrahim, a baller, totally cool, from Djibouti, and which is right near Ethiopia. I'm like, Ibrahim, let's go. Well, it's time. We got to go play, right? He's like, Bryan, hold on. I have to pray first. I go, pray on the court, bro. You're going to need it, talking trash. And he goes, no, like, this is what I do first, right? It's this time of day. It was midday, right? Because of the Muslim call to prayer 5 times a day, right? And to me, in my mind, just pray whenever. Pray at all times. Pray whenever. But Bryan, you don't understand. And clearly at that time, I didn't. He's like, I'm praying now. And he got out his carpet and he faced Mecca, faced that direction, right? And he was there praying. And I'm sitting there on the couch with my basketball. How can I not pray at this time? So there's this experience of the divine, which for me is beyond words. And also through it, and through our heritage, our spiritual and cultural heritage, we have this experience of, call it love, deep peace. Sometimes we use this word transcendent. And if you can find that space and that community that reminds you of that deeper reality, then go there, be with, follow, uh, sit, listen. And it's not anything. Not anything will do this for us.
Sorry for that abrupt ending. That really, unfortunately, our conversation with Bryan got cut short. He was in the middle of his workday at school and he had to go to his next class all of a sudden. So that's kind of why we decided to make this a double episode alongside Clay Dockery. And so we finished with the Bryan portion, but I love Bryan Lorentz's enthusiasm and zest for life and how grounded in kind of a simple and everyday American life story Bryan's story is. Minivan to soccer practice, family Halloween costume discussions, being a misunderstood teenager. These are the places that we are called to show up. Just it's in the mundane, it's in the everyday. We don't have to leave or remove ourselves to find our spirituality. And yet somehow doing so for a while seems to help. And that's true at the level of a short or even extended retreat or even monastic living. And it's true in the silence and solitude that we might cultivate on, just that day-to-day basis. Our next guest committed his day-to-day, like I said in the intro, to just working with families who are not of the same faith tradition and helping them make that work. And I love this because we had very few guests this season whose actually work they got paid to do was directly interfaith in nature. So let's hear from Clay Dockery. Clay is a nonprofit leader and seminary graduate whose work focuses on interfaith families, identity, and community life. He holds a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary and has worked directly with interfaith families through his time at Interfaith Community, supporting individuals and couples navigating religious differences in their relationships and family structures. Professionally, Clay serves as Director of Operations at Renaissance Youth Center, where he leads organizational systems, staff support, and program infrastructure for a diverse community-based organization. Across his work, he brings a people-centered approach that blends theological training with practical experience, focusing on how belief, culture, and identity show up in everyday life. Clay is particularly interested in how interfaith families navigate tradition, belonging, and change, and how both religious and secular institutions can better support people whose lives don't fit neatly into a single framework. Clay, that's great work, and it's so great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here, and I'm excited to talk about that work with you.
Awesome. Can you? So we often like to have people kind of just give us their story, as it were. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, whatever you'd like to share, especially maybe the points that were particularly important for you in kind of moving you towards the work that you find so important.
Yes. So I would say the biggest point for me is that I've always felt a little bit as though I was a bit on the margins of whatever group that it is that I've been a part of. But I've also been very good at communicating with people and kind of talking to people and all those things. So like in high school, I was the nerd, but also on the tennis team. And so I kind of was able to navigate through both worlds. And by being kind of on the outskirts of both, I could watch the people who were involved in both. And as I started to really get involved in religion, and my thoughts about religion kind of happened as it began college, and I started exploring all types of different religious experiences. And what I found was that there were a lot of things that were really nice for people who knew what it was that they felt, who understood what it was that they wanted out of religion and life and all of those things. But for those people who were kind of on the margins, who weren't against it, who weren't like, I hate all of this is terrible, but were instead unable to figure out exactly where they fit into it, there wasn't a whole lot there for them. And I felt as though because of those things that I'd always been able to do about being able to make connections, that became my interest. And then I kind of went further and further and further into that as I went throughout undergrad, and then I decided to go to seminary, and then after seminary, that's what I've been doing for the past, I guess, 15 years,
Wow.
longer than that.
So you made it sound like you didn't start getting into religious stuff until college. Did you grow up Christian and you were saying like you didn't get into like other religious traditions until college, or tell me a little bit more about
I
that.
I grew up as a member of a Southern Baptist church that was pretty adamantly opposed to the things that they were trying to get me to do. From very early, I was kicked out of Sunday school about 5 times, um, because not because I did anything bad necessarily that I think, but I asked the wrong questions,
Mm.
and that very much turned me off to it. So I remember actually, and I feel like I may have even told you this story years and years ago, Dave. I was about 12 years old, and I went with my grandmother, who was the person who was a member of the church, to the Southern Baptist church that we grew up in. And I was super excited on this day because usually the things were very different from what I wanted, but they actually invited a rabbi to come to speak at the church that I grew up in. And I was super excited. I'm like, this is a different religion. This is interesting. This is something that we can all kind of grow and learn together. I was super happy. And the pastor of the church spent the entire time sitting on the front row shouting insults at the rabbi.
My
Like,
gosh.
it was very, very bad. And I swore that day that I was never going to step back in a church again. Like, I left in the middle. And so it was only a couple years later, I started going to a Presbyterian church instead of the Southern Baptist church, which was much more my speed theologically. And then everything that I said before kind of took shape. So I grew up Christian, but kind of got turned off by a bunch of very specific things culminating in that moment.
Yeah, wow, that could be just really traumatic in so many different ways. I mean, so how did you recover from that? Like, what did that process look like? I mean, having such an experience of such as that, and then to kind of have you at least open again to working with people from different religious traditions. I mean, how did that whole process happen?
So I try to be open-minded about everything. And for me personally, what I determined was, again, kind of what I was talking about before. I realized that it wasn't, I mean, I never felt like it was the teachings of Jesus, right, that were the
Hmm.
problem.
Right.
It was the way in which people were taking their interpretation and forcing people to go through their understanding of it, that seemed to be the problem to me. And it did take a while. Like again, I was relatively young when all of this happened, and then I didn't even know that there were other branches of Christian. I knew there were, like, intellectually, but I didn't know anything about them. So I started exploring. Because I wanted to see what else was out there. So I went to other types of Christian churches. I went to Unitarian church. I went to a bunch of different types of places to try to see what other people felt and thought about God and life and all of those things. Because I have always felt I've always felt like there's something more than just what we have here, right? Like, I've always had that kind of understanding that people define religiously. And so I wanted to try to see if there was a format in which I was able to connect to it. And eventually I was able to find that basically in college at the Presbyterian Student Center at the University of Georgia. Bodh Gaya was the pastor there, and everything was about faith questions. Everything was about exploring and questioning and coming to things from a different perspective.
Mm.
And so once I found this church that had a relatively standard theological understanding within PCUSA, which is left wing for Christianity, but um, it still had, like, this openness to it. And so I wound up engaged in that, and because we were able to do all of those things, and I was able to still believe what I believe, but also share different things. And we would have, again, in that we actually had people like Latter-day Saints people would come, Catholic people would come, Unitarians and Baha'i and all kinds of people would come to our faith questions, and we would share together. And it wasn't antagonistic in any way. Everybody was like, this is what I believe, this is my faith, this is my understanding. We can question it together. You can talk about your faith and your understanding, and that is what I wound up connecting to. And then after undergrad, I decided to go to seminary, partially because I wanted to continue to do that work in my everyday life. And then secondly, because I was still interested in what makes people interested in religion. Why is it that people want to go down this path? And so it was kind of an intellectual exercise for me in some parts, and then also a kind of foundational theological calling on the other side.
So clearly, a desire for interfaith dialogue has been written on your heart from a young age, and that's really cool. But you specifically found your way into working with mixed religion families or mixed denomination families. How did that happen, and what's it like?
So the biggest aspect of working with mixed religious families is sort of what I was talking about earlier, right? So what the interfaith community's mission has always been is to meet the families where they are, not to try to tell them what it is that they need to believe, but to say, your family is what your family is. You are a family, a couple who have kids or don't have kids, and you do exist. You are human beings, because so often the institutions get caught up in the theology. Should you exist? Should you have this connection? Should you, as a Christian person, marry a Jewish person, or whatever your types of religious interconnectivity might be? And what the Interfaith Community's mission, before I became involved at all, was to say, we're not questioning whether or not these couples and families should exist, because they do exist. We want to figure out how to get them the most authentic and respectful and understandable lessons and community that they can have in order for them to grow and thrive as both religious and real families together. And so I was at seminary, and I went looking for work study, and I actually got a work study job, not at Interfaith Community, but at Cross Currents, which is a religious magazine. It's been around for 50 years and publishes articles about Christianity and all types of different topics. And while I was working at Cross Currents, I met Sheila, who was the executive director and founder of Interfaith Community, and was like, this is exactly the type of stuff I want to do. So I started working as person administrative assistant for Interfaith Community, and then working on curriculum, writing kind of the Christian side of the curriculum, because it was, we can talk more specifically about what all of that is about in a minute, but writing the Christian side of the curriculum, and then running the programming in kind of as a whole afterwards. It's because what Interfaith Community was doing, once I met them and found out what they were doing, was very much in line with what I feel is an important place for connecting with people, because connecting with people, meeting people where they are, is such a big part of what I felt like was a big part of what I wanted to do.
How do people find out about it? How did, like, clearly people are aware that they're in a mixed religion relationship, but is it kind of like, I don't know, they're going to therapy, and the therapist is like, yeah, it seems like your difference in religion is becoming an issue. Maybe you guys need to work through that. And here's a place that does it. Like, how do people, or is it like when they have kids, they're like, oh, now we really have to figure this out, because, it's pretty hard to, it's one, before kids, we can just observe separately and we can go to our different things. But now we have to really figure, is that kind of the impetus?
Yes, you really called it. It's one of those two places. So either it's when couples are first getting together and they are very tied to their own religious identity, and they are unsure what it will mean to be dating someone who is from a different religious background. And either they get through that moment, or they never have that question to start with because you're just dating somebody. It doesn't really matter to you who it was. And usually, not every time, but usually during those times, neither person is particularly religious or particularly, like, they might go to high holiday services, they might go to Easter, Christmas. They don't go every week. They don't care a whole lot about the particulars of theology in that standpoint, for most of the families. But yeah, the big time, the big so there's actually three big points. One being that point where they first get together. That's a smaller percentage, but is a pretty big percentage overall of the families who wind up doing this. And usually one or the other, but not both, care a lot at that point.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is when they have kids. That one is the biggest one, at least for the interfaith community. That was the biggest time when people would come in because they did not know what they were going to do with their kids, because should they raise their kids as Jewish? Should they raise their kids as Christian? And by the way, the interfaith community is open. I think this is still the case. I haven't worked there in a few years now, but while I was working there in particular, it was open to many different combinations, but our focus was on Jewish Christian families, and most of the Christian families were Catholic.
Interesting.
Okay, and then so that was the second point, and that was a big point. And then the third point is actually when the kids were coming of age type of time. So they were, I probably not quite to 12 yet, but in that 10 to 11 framework. So they'd either been raising them learning about both traditions, or they had been raising them kind of not quite yet doing it, and they came in for the first time at that point. But they were, should I give my kid a bar mitzvah?
I see.
They probably had not been baptized as a baby because of all the other questions. So they were like, should I baptize my yeah.
That's a really hard time, because that's the time that kids start to be discerning out of religion, typically, and
yes,
the those middle school ages,
and also the kids
not
have
to mention
their
how
own
hard the Torah portion is going to be if you haven't been in Hebrew school all this time.
and they also have their own feelings and understanding about it at that point, which is actually one of the big things that I was writing and doing, was the identity and transition side of our curriculum. I did that entirely myself because it's all of these questions, right? What is it I believe? Why do I believe what I believe? All those things. I do know that the kids who grew up in the program, at least during the 10 years or so that I was significantly involved, are far more religiously connected still now to this day than just the average everyday kids of the same age.
So it works. Tends to work.
Well, as I would say all the time back then, we control the inputs. We can't control the outputs. So we give the best inputs that we can, and then we see where the outputs go. But for the most part, our outputs at least have been what we had been hoping.
Right. So what are the inputs? Like, what do you actually do with the couple or with the kids, if there's kids?
So the first and biggest thing is to try to give them an authentic understanding of what, for the kids, an authentic understanding of what it is that the religion itself teaches. And to say that there's many different types, there's many different ways that you can go about this, but so we had, like, early on, we have like Bible stories and various things, but it's to teach that you can learn this story from a Christian perspective, and you can learn the story from a Jewish perspective, and you can understand that both things have value, and both things are authentic, and both things have an understandable thing. You don't have to believe one way or another to know all of these things. That's about, again, inputs. So they would have usually, again, like an actual, so we would hire teachers, and the teachers would teach in teams where there was a Jewish teacher and a Christian teacher who would teach the lessons together. So if it was a Jewish lesson, then the Jewish teacher would be the leader and teach about it and talk about their own personal understanding and talk about what it is. And then the Christian teacher would be there, give support, ask questions. And so the kids would see that these two people who are very invested in this are working together and communicating together and talking about the same story, but from different perspectives. And so that's kind of the basic fundamental understanding of it. The other thing was to be able to give like, again, all of your big like religious ceremonies, holidays, Christmas, Easter, to have services where you would have, again, a fully authentic service. It's not like sometimes you get interfaith stuff where you get kind of a squishy, like, this is become interfaith service. So we try to give a fully authentic service, but one that is fully open to the other families, which is often not the case. Again, even in places that are trying, the families don't feel welcome because
Right.
usually, not always, but usually the actual institution is trying to get you to choose one or the other. And we were saying, we're not trying to get you to choose one or the other. We know you are who you are. If you decide to choose one or the other, that's great. That's fine. But we're not trying to get you to choose to be Christian. We're not trying to get you to choose to be Jewish. We are meeting you where you are. And that's the fundamental difference in what the work is. And that difference of intent is what I find so important for what I've always tried to do, because it's my intent is kind of like I mentioned here, not about the output. My intent is not to get you to believe what I believe, not to get you to not believe what I believe. It's just to give the input. It's just to say, here are the data points. Here are the things that are important. Here are the things that we can share together. And if that means that we are now going to be more connected, great. If that means that you need to find something else, if you need a more dogmatic understanding of religion, as we were talking about earlier, that's also perfectly fine with me. Like, I know that there are different reasons why people would need a different understanding of God than what I have. I can exist in this kind of liminal space a lot better than a lot of other people because of my life circumstances, because of where I grew up, because of how I had the experiences I had, and because this is more comfortable for me. That may not be where you need to be.
I like how you said liminal space there. What does that mean to you?
It means that always it's always in the transition. There's always a tension between what is and what can be. So
Mm.
for me, that's where I actually feel most comfortable, because if you try to give me something that is more traditional, then I'm going to pound up against it. If you give me something that is too new wave and too out there, then I'm not going to feel grounded. But I like existing within the liminality in that middle space.
Mm.
But again, that's just me.
Yeah. No, I can relate to that very much so. This conversation here also reminds me of, especially what you were just talking about, like, I have a very close friend, priest mentor of mine who, early on was saying, when you're working with couples who are in like a mixed religion situation, and actually, ironically, I was just part of a marriage ceremony yesterday of a Buddhist and a Catholic. And and he said, when the question of children come up, he advises that it's best to try to instill some type of tradition or some type of religious preference, even with a child that you're bringing up, for the simple reason that, even when they get to that point that we're talking about here, when they're like in their teenage years, at least they have something to reject rather than feeling like they have nothing. And the chances of them choosing something are kind of slim to none because they have no point of reference as to what's going on. So I don't know what you think of that advice. I mean, I'm not saying that you need to champion or whatever, but uh, would that make sense in some level, with considering the work that you see, especially with younger people in their teenage years and going through this whole exploration of the religious sense?
So I'd say I certainly see how it makes sense. And actually, the funny thing is, I see it as tying together, because no matter what it is that you instill, right? Like, I think
Hmm.
that it fits even what Interfaith Community is doing, even what it would be doing if you were to say go to a more new age type of understanding, right? So if you're a person who teaches your kids that you want them to accept all religions as completely equal, that itself is a dogma, right? That's
Right.
that's something that is something you're trying to instill in them. So it gives them a sense of something that they may want to install, reject, or accept. So I kind of agree in the concept there. I don't necessarily agree that it has to be a specific understanding. I think that but I do kind of agree that knowing kids, and kind of I still work with kids every day. Yeah, they're gonna want to come up against whatever it is. So if you are what many families, I think this goes back to what Dave was saying earlier, right? The vast majority tend to be moving more towards no religion at all, because it's not something that is a large part of their lives. It's not something that they've been taught. It's not something that they've given any grounding in at all. So it's not even something that comes up when you start to think about it. Like if I went out and asked the kids who are coming in here later on this afternoon, um, they wouldn't even have a framework to start with. And so I think that by giving them a framework, you are giving them something foundational that they can then start from to explore. Kind of like I have absolutely no interest in my Southern Baptist background at all. That's totally not the type of understanding of Christianity or God or life or anything that I connect to. But by having had it, I definitely know that it's not. And if I had
Mm-hmm.
not had it, then I wouldn't. So I agree with that entirely.
Getting back to your previous work, what were some of the most common challenges that the parents would face in while navigating the religious differences? I mean, obviously,
The
it's just like figuring out like how to raise the kids, like a really big one. But was there tension for themselves as well? At that point.
So the biggest and most common challenge is when the kids were about to be school aged, they realized that they cared whether the kids were going to be in their own religious tradition or they're part of this religious tradition, whether they had talked about it before, whether they had communicated it before, or any of those things. And that became a big stumbling block for a lot of the families because, you know, for various different reasons in each of the different traditions, there are big kind of long term challenges that arise from if you don't raise your kids within your own religious tradition. Whether you want your kids to have the same beliefs as you, whether you think if you're Christian and you think if I don't raise my kid as a Christian, then have they're going to go to hell. Like that was something that would come up sometimes. If you were Jewish and you weren't going to raise your kids Jewish, were you stopping the entire uh, your entire background was going to end, and those questions would become very real at very specific moments. And again, it did not matter for the families whether or not they had processed it, whether or not they had talked about it, whether or not they got their counseling about it. It became real at the moment it felt real. And that's a real challenge. And it's a real thing that you have to be open and willing to meet somebody at a very difficult point, because they are feeling at that moment that what they have been doing has been wrong. They are feeling at that moment that what they have to do now is going to change the entire course of their life and their family. And so that's one of those, that was the most difficult time for everyone. That generally was the case at one of those three moments for almost all of the families. If it happened at the very beginning and it happened at that you're together as a couple time, usually, not every time, but usually those couples did not stay together. But if it happened at one of the other two times, you wanted the couples to stay there. You wanted them to keep their family together. You wanted them to continue on whatever path would work for them. And for the most part, you could navigate those questions with the families once they came up by helping them to understand, first of all, that they're not the only ones who had been in that place. That's the biggest thing, and it's one of the biggest things about finding a community, is that when you don't have a community, you feel like you're the only one, right? No matter what the community is. But once you find community, you see other people have been through the same challenges. Other people have navigated them. They've navigated them in different ways. We don't have to do this the way that my parents say we have to do it. We don't have to do it the way that I feel like I have to do it. And so for the most part, and again, it was different for every single family. So there's not like an answer that says, okay, well, if this comes up, then you have to do this, 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 and this. You have to find out where they are, work with them, and then help them to choose what their path is. Now, for some of them, their path at that point becomes, I am going to now raise my kids Jewish. Others, I'm now going to raise my kids Catholic. Most of the families in the interfaith community, they get through it, they work through it, and then they're going to continue on the same path they're on. But none of those three paths are, at least from our perspective, from my perspective, bad. You want to find the path that works for you. This works for our family, that works for your family, and that's okay. That's why it's about input, not output, right?
Can you maybe just speak of a moment that you can think of where your interfaith work kind of showed up as being extremely helpful for what you're doing, say now at Renaissance?
Yes. So I would say that I don't think you have to talk about God to be doing God's work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so good. Well, this season's all about listening. So maybe we can just end with you giving us some tips on how can we become better, proactive listeners without agenda.
So I would say the number one thing, it's the thing that popped in my head first when you said that, is to realize that we probably do have some agenda to start with. So to open ourselves up of that, to say, I'm going to note that I have this agenda and try to set it aside. So that was kind of the very first thing that pops into head. And then secondly, to take the time, even in those crisis situations, even in those moments where it feels as though you don't have the time, to take a step back. My grandmother used to always say to count to 10, right? And so I don't just count to 10. I try to take 10 moments, 10 breaths, 10 steps to say, I'm going to engage in this conversation as openly as possible, and then to let the things that you are saying and the things that the person who is talking to you say kind of seep in, and then structure them, because I want to put everything in a structure to start with. So I have to take those moments to step back and let the information that you're giving me seep in. So I think those are the two big things. One, really make sure that you know that you probably have an agenda to start with. So you note that, you acknowledge it, and then you set it aside as much as you can. And then secondly, you take the time to let that other stuff wash over you.
Such great advice.
Yeah.
I know it's hard for people to let go of agendas, though.
Especially
if you feel as if you've been almost like have a divine right to the agenda too. I mean, like that's a difficulty,
I certainly feel that way, right? Like, it's like, hey, if my agenda is everything I've been talking about here, I have to understand that if I'm coming into a conversation with a person who does not believe any of those things, I need to let that set.
Yeah. And that's a fully rational and reasonable position to be in as well, right?
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, this has been great, Clay. Can you let people know where they can find Interfaith Community in case they're in an area and maybe need that? And then also, if you want to plug anything of your own, that'd be
sure. So interfaithcommunity.org is the place to go for the chapters, the classes, all of that stuff. Website is up, running. You can check out there, and you can get in contact with any of the people who are the chapter chairs and the teachers of those classes now. And for me, I would say if you want to check out any of the stuff I'm doing, I do YouTube under Venue Diagram, and I am out there on all the social media as SmartPenguin78. So if you wanted to send anything to me on any of the different platforms, then I'd be happy to respond.
All right. Well, we'll be sure to link that in the show notes. Clay, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Really great meeting you, Clay. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
What I love about pairing these conversations together between Bryan Lorentz and Clay Dockery is we get a very full sense of the balance we need in life between contemplation and action. Thinking and praying deeply, we can discern what God has in store for us. And then acting accordingly, we can then have kind of the experience and fodder to bring back into contemplation and prayer. That wraps up this quick segue episode. In our next episode, we're going to hear from Mingdao Deng about what Taoism is and how he practices it in his everyday life, from body to spirit to mind. It's fascinating, great conversation, great intro conversation if you're not too familiar with Taoism. And I look forward to sharing that with you next time. Religion to Reality is not just a podcast, it's a monthly interfaith gathering. In fact, as I record this, we just had our first one last night. It's always the first Wednesday of each month. It's online. It's free to sign up. You can find the sign up at our Substack, which is religiontoreality.substack.com. I encourage you to check that out. Go there, see what it's all about, and drop us a line. Comment on the posts, or just send a message to me in the inbox. I'd love to hear from you. Religion to Reality was created and is executive produced by me, Dave Plisky, and is produced and edited by Nick Strapoli and Connor Donnelly. You can find the show notes and other resources at religiontoreality.org. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.